So Clive Davis is dead, and Diddy, sitting in his prison cell at MDC Brooklyn, is reportedly wailing. Not crying, not upset, wailing. And the word choice matters, because this isn't just a man mourning a mentor. This is a man who just heard his last lifeline snap. When Diddy was 21 years old, hungry and desperate for a record deal, Clive Davis was the one who opened the door. And from what we understand, Diddy didn't hesitate for a single second to do what was necessary to walk through it. Clive was the original sugar daddy, though that phrase barely scratches the surface of what this relationship actually was. Because the way Diddy is reacting right now tells you this went far beyond any transactional arrangement. This wasn't a one-time thing that happened at some industry party in the 90s and got quietly forgotten. This was a decades-long arrangement that shaped the entire architecture of Diddy's career and, frankly, his identity. Clive didn't just hand him a record deal. He handed him a blueprint. He showed a young, ambitious kid that the real currency in this industry wasn't talent or hit records. It was access. Access to bodies, access to secrets, access to the private rooms where the actual decisions got made. And Diddy absorbed that lesson so completely that he built his entire empire on it. Every artist who walked through Bad Boy, every executive who sat across from Diddy at a negotiation table, every journalist who got one of those late-night phone calls, they all understood, on some level, that they were dealing with someone trained by Clive Davis in the darker arts of power. And now the sensei is dead, the master is gone, and the student is locked in a cell organizing library books by the Dewey Decimal System, wondering how it all fell apart. What nobody is really talking about is how Diddy is reportedly more devastated about Clive than he ever was about Kim Porter. Think about that. These two men spent years in the closet together, literally and figuratively, while the entire industry looked the other way. Clive is said to have introduced Diddy to the whole lifestyle, the techniques, the specific tastes that would later define the kinds of gatherings that are now central to a federal indictment. Clive was the architect of the whole operation. And now that he's gone, Diddy understands exactly what that means. Let me paint you a picture of what those years actually looked like, because the music industry has been running a quiet conspiracy of amnesia about this relationship for decades. You'd see them together at Clive's pre-Grammy Gala, the most exclusive party in the business, where invitations alone carried more value than most deals. And Diddy would be there not as a guest or a peer, but as something else entirely, hovering near Clive all night, refilling his drink, laughing at his jokes a little too enthusiastically, touching his arm just a moment too long. Everyone in that room saw it. Every record executive, every A-list artist, every power attorney. They all knew. But Clive Davis was the king of this industry. You didn't whisper about Clive. Not if you wanted your career to survive. So everyone smiled, shook his hand, and collectively agreed not to see what was right in front of them. That agreement held for 30 years. 30 years of journalists killing stories. 30 years of assistants signing NDAs. 30 years of party guests suddenly finding somewhere else to look. Clive built a wall of silence around himself that was thicker than any fortress. And Diddy lived inside that wall, protected, nurtured, and yes, exploited in ways we're only now beginning to understand. The wailing coming from that prison cell is the sound of those walls coming down. Diddy spent the last couple of years watching his life go from 100 to 0, watching everything he built collapse in real time. And somewhere in the back of his mind, there's reason to believe he genuinely thought Clive would outlive him. That somehow, Clive would still be out there pulling strings, working angles, doing what powerful men do when they need to protect an investment. But Clive stayed silent. No public statement. No bail support. No lawyer. No move of any kind that would tie his name to Diddy's at the moment of maximum exposure. Because Clive Davis was always, at his core, a survivor. He knew when an asset became a liability. And Diddy, sitting in that cell, had to slowly come to terms with the fact that the man he loved, the man he gave everything of himself to, had quietly calculated that he was no longer worth the risk. That is a specific kind of heartbreak, and it makes a grown man wail. But Diddy held on to hope. He had to. He told himself Clive was waiting for the right moment, working behind the scenes in ways nobody could see, that the silence was strategic and not permanent. That fantasy is what let him get through the nights in that cell. Clive was still out there. Clive still had connections. Clive, despite the distance and the careful public disavowal, still cared. That was the story Diddy constructed to keep himself together. And now Clive is dead, and the fantasy died with him. Practically speaking, the legal machine now has no reason to hold back. Federal prosecutors can build their case without worrying about who they might be crossing. Witnesses who feared Clive's reach can suddenly find their nerve. Civil suits stuck in limbo can start moving forward. Every calculation that kept Diddy shielded for decades has been altered by a single death certificate. The ground has shifted, and for the first time, there is nobody standing on solid ground above him ready to pull him up. And speaking of people who are spiraling, Janice has apparently canceled her entire collection with Party City. That wig she wore to court, the one the officers had to actually investigate during the pat-down, the one that had its own gravitational field, that whole collection is now off the table. Which tells you the grief, or at least the performance of grief, is being taken very seriously in the Combs household. Because for this family, this is officially a day of mourning, the kind you see when a monarch falls. Christian still reportedly can't retain a lawyer, but somehow managed cosmetic surgery and a spontaneous trip to Tokyo. The math on that is genuinely wild. You can't cover a legal retainer to keep your father out of prison for the rest of his life, but you can board a 14-hour flight to Japan and come back with a new face. And yet there he is, posting Father's Day montages on Instagram, putting together these heartfelt tributes. Why? Because they need access to money. They have to perform devotion publicly to stay in good standing, because that's the only leverage they have left. The Combs sons are learning the same lesson their father learned at 21. How to perform loyalty to someone with power in order to secure your own future. The cycle continues even as the original architect of that cycle is gone and the original student weeps in a cell. And Diddy is in there right now, shelving books, organizing periodicals, probably shushing people during quiet hours. The man who once threw the most extravagant parties in the Hamptons, who dated Jennifer Lopez, Cassie, and Kim Porter, who built a billion-dollar empire on hit records and strategic relationships. That man is now a prison librarian. And every time he bends down to put a book on a lower shelf, his mind drifts somewhere else entirely. Back to Clive's mansion, the marble floors, the chandeliers, the baby oil warming on the side table. The nights when Clive wanted to get adventurous and Diddy was always willing to oblige. That's the Diddy nobody got to see. The one Clive created. And that version of Diddy is now trapped in a 6x8 cell with nothing but memories and a growing understanding that the best years of his life are behind him permanently. If you go back and look at old photographs, the evidence is sitting right there in plain sight. Diddy's face in pictures with Clive is unlike any other photo in his entire archive. Every single one of his teeth. All of them. That's not a smile you can manufacture. That's the face of a man standing next to someone who made everything possible. Someone who showed him a world he didn't know existed. Someone who made him feel completely seen. You can't fake that kind of radiance. And now it's gone, replaced by the sound of wailing echoing through the corridors of a federal detention center in Brooklyn. Every major inflection point in Diddy's career traces back to Clive Davis. The bad boy. Distribution deal through Arista. The industry connections that let him build his roster. The invitations to rooms where real power was brokered. All of it, Clive. And in exchange, Diddy provided something no contract could specify and no press release could acknowledge. He provided himself. His loyalty. His willingness to be whatever Clive needed, whenever Clive needed it. That's not speculation. That's the open secret the entire music industry has been sitting on for 30 years. And now that Clive is dead, it's going to come out in ways nobody can control. People who were afraid to speak while Clive was alive are going to start feeling emboldened. Journalists who couldn't get sources on the record are going to find those sources suddenly willing to talk. Former assistants, former security, former party guests. All the people who saw things and stayed quiet for 3 decades are going to start reevaluating that silence. Every secret they shared, every arrangement they made, every night they spent together, it's all about to become public record. And there is nothing Diddy can do to stop it from inside that cell. The wailing is anticipatory. It's the sound of a man hearing the floodgates starting to creak. Without Clive, Diddy is exposed in a way he has never been exposed before. Every other powerful person who might have protected him is either dead, disgraced, or keeping their distance. The industry has moved on. The legal system is closing in. The one person who knew where all the bodies were buried just took those secrets to the grave. And Diddy is alone in a way he has genuinely never been alone. He walked through the world for decades with an invisible shield around him, woven from Clive's influence and his own accumulated power. He could do things that would destroy ordinary people because he wasn't ordinary. He was Diddy. He was connected. He was untouchable. And now he's just another inmate with a number and a jumpsuit and a shift in the prison library. The psychological vertigo of that fall would break most people completely. The fact that Diddy is merely wailing and not fully catatonic is, in its own strange way, impressive. So when you hear that Diddy is wailing in his cell, understand what you're actually hearing. It's not just grief. It's not just love lost. It's the sound of a man watching the last wall of defense crumble in real time. The realization that the person who made him, who shaped him, who taught him how to survive in a ruthless industry, is gone. And with him went any realistic hope of a comeback, any chance of pulling strings from behind bars, any possibility that someone with real influence might step in. Diddy is crying because he loved Clive, but he's wailing because he knows what comes next. And for the first time in his life, he is facing it completely alone. No protector. No first love waiting in a mansion with the chandeliers and the baby oil and the whole setup. Just the cold reality of a prison cell, the weight of decades of secrets, and the sound of his own voice bouncing off concrete walls. That's not grief. That's the sound of an empire's final collapse, coming from the throat of the man who built it on his knees. If this story has you thinking, drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay on top of everything as it develops, make sure you're subscribed to Metro Society, because this is far from over.